JoAnna Battin from Xgility. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to be talking about chats and online meetings in Teams in really this unprecedented time. So just a little bit about me. I've spent a lot of my career using Microsoft technologies in consulting, with the last 3 years focusing specifically on strategy and advisory services around Office 365 and helping our customers to get into Office 365. And when Teams was announced 3 years ago and made available, I've spent the last 3 years really trying to help our customers figure out how that plays into everything. But here we are in an unprecedented time, in a situation where work doesn't mean a place anymore. And so how does Teams fit into that? How do you stay connected to the people that you're working with? And how do you relieve some of the stress that you're feeling in the situation that we're in right now? And so hopefully we'll be able to spend the next 15 minutes together to go over some of those features and the functionality that'll actually make that a little bit easier for you. So we're going to talk about communicating and engaging as you work from home, ensuring that your meetings and chats are productive, and how do you communicate in chats and conversations and Teams and channels. If some of those topics aren't familiar to you and you're not necessarily sure what those are, maybe there are people that we have on the line that are have been using Teams for a long time. I can tell you, even from our perspective, it's completely different than it was when we were in the office. And so you're not alone when that's happening. It's happening across the board. And so if you've been using it for a long time, you're probably recognizing that there are things that are different in the environment today. And if you're new to Teams and have never used this before and you're a little apprehensive about using it, I'm hoping to put some clarity around some things as we move into the new really normal. And as much as I don't necessarily like to say the new normal, I think that the new normal is a real positive thing. I actually think that when this crisis is over and when companies and people are allowed to go back to the office, the question will no longer be, do I need to be in my office? The question will be, where is work? And that can be in your home office. That can be in your office with your colleagues. And so as we think about it from that perspective, moving into the future and when things calm down, we need to talk about how do we communicate and engage from home when you have people not just all working from their home offices, but people who might be in the office, people who might be at home, people who might be working from a coffee shop. And we need to talk about making sure that meetings and chats are productive. I think that's a struggle that all of us are dealing with right now. How do I make the most out of the time that I'm spending online and I'm spending working during my days and make it as productive as possible, and that I'm still maintaining those relationships that I have with people, just as if I were sitting in an office or sitting at a cubicle next to somebody. And so we're going to talk about how to communicate in chats and conversations, Teams and channels. If you don't know what those are, if you do know what those are, we're going to talk briefly about that. But just know we have some additional webinars that were coming up that we're going to be talking and taking some deep dives into Teams and channels more specifically and how that is, and also about meetings. We're going to do a real quick overview today, but hopefully you'll come back and check us out for those future ones where we do a little bit more deep dive. So let's talk about two specific areas. One is chat functionality. And we'll dive into that as I start to show you the tool itself and really where that comes into play. But chat really is to replace that single communication to an individual or individuals that you're working with, right? You may want to use chat to replace an email or a quick email that you might want to send. If you don't need to keep track of it, there's no need to actually have it in email. Go ahead and send a quick chat to somebody. There's some features there that make that fun and connecting with you and the people that you're working with. And then on the other hand, we have Teams, and that's really around the more secure area where you're working directly with a group of people or your teammates, where you want to keep things private, whether that's documents or conversations or meetings, one-on-one with a team, the entire team, that's it. And the reason that I talk about those two things as separate, because they absolutely have very similar functionality. The reason I talk about those two things as separate is because of where the information is stored. And when you start wondering who and how you should communicate with, that's what you need to take into consideration. Let's talk about chats. Chats are one-on-one or one to a couple of people, but your chat conversations are actually stored within your OneDrive and the other person's OneDrive for Business. And so when you add people, and I'll show you this a little later, but when you add people to conversations, it's stored in their individual OneDrives as well. If there's a need for that information to be saved and communicated to others later on, maybe you add an additional team member and you want them to actually see the previous history of that conversation, you want to start using the Teams functionality for conversations and posts, because that will stay persistent with the team. As long as the team is there, then that information will be there. And there are some exceptions to that. We'll get into that in a later webinar, probably, when it comes to security and governance. But that's really the difference there. And so as we start talking about those two things, hopefully that makes a little bit more sense. So with that, I think we're going to jump into the Teams application itself and walk through a couple of features that I hope will make you a little bit more productive. All right, so what we're looking at right now is the Teams environment. And remember, I talked about Teams and chat. We're going to focus in these two areas today. We're going to talk about chats here real quick. And you notice I'm having a conversation with one of my colleagues. His name is Bo Butcher. And we're having a discussion, and I'm going to ask him real quickly what Megan had to say. And when I do, Bo's going to let me know that he wants to actually communicate and bring Megan into this conversation. The reason I want you to see this is because I'm now having a one-on-one conversation. But the important thing is that all during this conversation, remember I said earlier, we're one-on-one with each other. So this information is being stored in my OneDrive. It's also being stored in Bo's OneDrive. Any files or any other activity is between myself and Bo. But I'm going to, as he requests, go ahead and add her to this conversation. There's Megan. I'm going to pull her in. I want you to notice what happens. My screen actually is replaced. And my screen is replaced with a fresh conversation because Megan doesn't need to and is kept private from my previous private conversation with Bo. So in order to do that, it actually starts a very fresh conversation where the three of us then can communicate together. The other thing is you'll notice that there's files up here. And files is actually my OneDrive for Business. Remember I said the conversation is stored there, but files also. So should we share files here, it's actually going to be available to people as really behind the scenes. It's actually sharing it with my OneDrive, or my OneDrive is being shared with them. You notice I can have a video call here, so I can hit video call and it would dial both of them and bring them into a video conversation. I can simply have a voice conversation here, or I can share my screen. And I'm going to go back to Bo and my conversation from earlier, because I think this is really important. I like to use the 4-message rule. When I'm talking about the 4-message rule, if I'm back and forth with someone and we're having 4 or 5 conversations, I like to use that number 4 to make sure that if we're doing that, we should actually be having a conversation, whether that's video or whether that's a phone call. Let's pick up the phone. Again, I think that goes back to let's continue to keep those conversations, because before I probably would have been able to go and have a conversation with Bo and I wouldn't be doing it this way. So why not jump on face-to-face with him? The other thing that I'm able to do is I'm able to actually come down here and format. And I can take not just a simple chat that looks like a text message, but I can format it. I can put bullet points here. I can add links. I can do bold and italic. I can make this fun. I can do things like GIFs and emojis, GIFs and emojis and stickers that help make my conversations with my colleagues a little more fun. I can attach files from here. Again, attaching files from here, it'll be stored inside of that conversation, but it'll allow me to very easily go back and say, you know what, I know that I talked to Bo in a one-on-one conversation. Where's the file, or what is that file we did? And I'll be able to see that later on. And then I can actually schedule a meeting. So let's just say that I need to schedule a meeting with Bo, and I decide, you know what, Bo, I just asked you a quick question. Can you meet on Friday at 3 o'clock? I can click this very simply. I can add the title of my meeting, and immediately Bo Butcher is added as an attendee. I can schedule and put any information. You notice this very, very, very much looks like Outlook and the way that you would schedule a meeting in Outlook. If I go to Scheduling Assistant, and this is fairly new, I can actually see what his meeting or availability is for Friday, the 24th. And I then am able to determine whether or not he can attend a meeting at a time that I would like. So I'm going to go ahead and close here. I'm going to discard, and I'm back to now my conversation with Bo, and I'm able to continue to have my conversation with him. It actually would add that to his calendar, so he'd have it on his calendar, and I'd get a notification that Bo has accepted my meeting invitation. So now I'm going to go over to Teams, and I'm going to switch over to Teams, and I'm going to talk about Teams. And I've created this team, Strategy and Advisory Services. And you notice whenever you create or somebody creates a team for you, there's always a general channel. That's where all of the conversations and the files by default are stored and maintained, and you can go to. The reason for channels, and again, in a future webinar, we're going to talk about and dive deeper into creating channels, when and why would I create a channel versus when would I create a new team. But I could also have conversations in a much smaller, more focused area. So while Strategy and Advisory Services is a very large, there are a lot of topics that we cover in it. You know, we can break it down into very specific things that are for strategy and help that our customers need. And so we're going to use this here. Again, you'll notice I have posts in Teams versus chat in the individual. But my options are a little different here. In my format, I actually have, not only do I have the ability to do the things that I had to do in chat, but now I have a couple of new options. I can have a new conversation, or I can create a new announcement. I can have everyone reply, or only me and the people that I create as moderators. We're going to dive into that in another webinar as well. What is a moderator, and how do I make sure that that happens as an administrator? I can post this announcement or post this information into multiple channels. You notice I have multiple channels set up. Maybe I want to make an announcement, or I want to post something so that across the organization of my team, they actually see the same thing. And then I can add a subject. To me, this is very important. Remember I said earlier, a team continues that conversation, and it is actually held within the team itself for as long as you need to. And when we talk about that, sometimes search comes into question. How do I find things that I know we talked about? If you add a subject here, you can use this search toolbar to actually find the subject. So if you get really good at organizing that, you actually are able to then very easily find that conversation. It makes it a lot easier. I can attach a file. When I attach a file here, remember we talked about attaching a file in chat, puts it in my OneDrive. If I upload it, makes it available in my OneDrive. From here, it actually goes to the files system, which is actually SharePoint on the back end, and uploads that file here. Again, I have the same features and functionality, but my meetings and my conversations and the way that I communicate in terms of meetings is a little different. You notice if I hover, I get this Meet Now option here. And I'm going to go ahead and click on that. Typically, what you would see is my camera would come up. The reason we're doing the webinar and I'm not actually able to display two videos at the same time, it was important for me to show my face to you guys and be available to you. But normally you would see my image, my recorded image, or my camera here to be able to have the conversation. For now, though, I'm actually going to show you this real quick, the schedule a meeting. And you remember what we saw in chat where I was having one-on-one conversation with my colleague. I actually have the same exact information. Title, when are they available, does it repeat, all of the other things, including scheduling assistant. But I have one additional item here, and that is it's inside of my strategy and advisory services team in the general channel. But let's say I actually went here and click Meet Now, or I wanted to schedule a meeting here, but instead of doing it in general, I wanted to find another channel to put it in. I could actually do that, and it would schedule my meeting inside of that channel. That's pretty great functionality in terms of having the flexibility if I'm someplace and I realize that I've clicked on the wrong location. The other thing that I want to point out here that's really important is if I don't add attendees here, all they'll see is that the meeting has started. If I add attendees, it'll add it onto their calendar. And I'm going to go back here and I'm going to say Meet Now. And I'm going to click on Meet now, and I'm going to invite Bo. And there is Bo. Hi, Bo. So we're going to go really quickly through this. And I think by now people recognize that Teams is available in a browser. It's available in a desktop application, which is what I'm using, and it's available on your phone. The important thing to say is that if I'm on my phone and I'm joining a Teams meeting, I can still have video with people. But if I join there, my mute button is on by default. So I'm not going to actually be able to speak right away. The other thing that you need to know when you join a meeting, when you join a Teams meeting, is that I'm unmuted when I'm using the application. And so just pay attention as you're coming into a meeting that you recognize if you have noise in the background, or, you know, we're all these days with children and dogs and other things happening. Just be aware that your mute is on. I'm sorry, your mute is not on, and that whatever is coming through your mic is available for others to hear. And so, right, the opposite of that is I put myself on mute. And if I put myself on mute, then others can't hear me. And one of the struggles I know that people are having is it takes a little bit of time every time somebody puts themselves on mute to remember that they're on mute. And so just be aware of that, be cognizant of it, and make sure that when you get ready to speak, or when it's your turn to speak on a meeting, that you unmute yourself before you come into the conversation. Otherwise, you'll have 5 or 6 people saying, "Hey, JoAnna, you're on mute. Can you unmute yourself so we can hear you?" And you'll just be talking on the screen. And the other thing is my camera is turned off on this. I'm communicating here, right? So I'm not able to actually share my camera with Bo, but really turning your camera on this, I get to see Bo's face. He gets to see mine. It's more of a connection between the two of us, and it really just makes things a lot easier. I can share my screen. I'm going to give you some quick tips here. If I click share, I get an option of what is available. We're going to talk about whiteboards and some other things later, but I can share my entire desktop, or I can share my window, or I can share an application. I think it's important to talk about these two. If you have low bandwidth, it's really a good idea for you to choose window. Using your desktop and showing and sharing your entire desktop actually pulls and makes things available that maybe you're not even wanting others to ever see in your meeting. So choose the window that you want somebody to see. Just makes it a little bit easier on everybody's bandwidth. The other thing that is important, and we're going to go ahead and I'm going to minimize that. I'm going to click on this more actions, and let's just go through this list real quick. If you have trouble connecting, your headset is not working, or there's something going on with your mic, check here first. It's the ellipsis, show device settings. You'll see the devices there. Sometimes Microsoft does a really good job of, and Teams does a really good job of picking that up. But let's just say, for example, it's not working. That's where I would go first. I can see my meeting notes. I can see my meeting details. I can enter a full screen. And really what that means is it removes the context of Teams from there and expands it to your entire desktop. Show background effects is a really great new feature. And if you haven't seen this yet, this is a lot of fun and can actually protect you from things like kids running in the background, or your pets, or even privacy, to protect your privacy by not showing what you have in your background. So you notice Bo just went to the blurred screen. That's a really easy one. But if I click on background effects, I then get a bunch of options. Blurred is the first one, but I'm then presented with many items that Microsoft has provided and made available to us. Bo can be at the beach if he wants to. It can be a technical, it can be silly, it can be beautiful scenes. The other thing that he can do is he can actually upload and create a custom one that's custom to your organization. So in this case, you see behind Bo's head is Xgility. The Xgility logo is there. So he's created a custom one. You could push that out to your employees and make it available so that every time they got on a call, they actually could see your company's logo, or others would know who you represented. It's a fun thing. It's good for a lot of ways, but just know that that's available. The other couple things that are available here are live captions. Take a look at live captions. We're not going to cover that today. We'll cover that in more detail. This is a really great new feature that is available, and it actually does translation or transcription of what's being said in real time. I speak very quickly, and for me, it's fascinating how it's able to keep up and does a really great job. The keypad, if I wanted to dial somebody in, start recording. I'm actually going to start recording here real quickly. I'm going to click on start recording. the thing that I like to do is I like to tell people, you notice I see that there's a privacy policy. It's always a good idea. I like to recommend that we start out by saying, I'm about to hit record, just want everybody to know that we're being recorded, and then hit the record button. And after that, announce that we're actually being recorded. It gives users the ability to leave if they need to, or if they don't choose to be recorded, but it also protects you as an organization in the event you have others in other jurisdictions that may actually have a tougher requirement for recording of other people. So that just always does a good thing, and it protects you there. I can end the meeting from here, or I can turn off incoming video, and turning off incoming video is actually another way for you to save bandwidth. So if I don't have a very good bandwidth, I'm going to want to turn off incoming video, and I'm going to want to turn off my camera, because that saves me from having to transmit and saves me from having to receive all of the other transmissions of video from other people. I can look at the chat panel. People might be asking questions. Instead of turning off their mute and coming and asking the question out loud, it allows them to do this. You can have conversations on the side as part of your meeting, and I can view other participants here or people who have joined my meeting. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hang up from the meeting. Thank you, Bo, for your help here. And you'll notice as we switch back to the team itself, I see a notification here that my meeting has started and the recording has started, but also that it's being saved to stream, saving recording to stream. So it's doing compression, it's doing all the translation, it's doing everything that we need it to do, so that later on, the members of my team can come back here and actually view the video in stream. But let's just talk about a couple of things to wrap up, and that is communicate with online chats and messaging, right? We're not in the office. Connection is so important, and making sure that you're really staying connected with your teammates and those that you work with on a regular basis. Don't be afraid to turn on your video. The background blur really makes it a lot more private for you and allows you to sort of protect the people that are in your house because of the environment that we're in. And then really just embrace the whole online meetings. I think I said it earlier that this is going to be the new normal. And I don't mean new normal that we're going to be isolating ourselves in the future. I actually think that what's happening is we're going to be able to, and companies are going to be able to trust that their people and that the staff that they have are able to work in a remote setting and be able to just really embrace the fact that you have a better work-life balance, you have more focused when you're actually working during the day, and this is going to be the next wave of things. So hopefully this helped you, and I know that we have a bunch of questions, and so I'm excited to get to those. Before we actually go to questions, what I would like to do is just sort of clarify something. I said earlier as part of the conversation around starting teams, and when you start teams that the mic is off by default. I want to make sure that I say it is in the last state that you left it. So if you muted and had your mute on when you close out of Teams, then it will stay muted. And if you come into the meeting with it unmuted, it will be unmuted. And so my point really just is to make sure that you are aware of your microphone and whether or not you're on mute. It looks like we might have a couple of questions here. The first one is about using Outlook and how do I schedule Teams meetings with Outlook? And you probably know that you're able to use the add-in or the plugin from Outlook in order to schedule meetings. And so there are a couple things there. The plugin allows you to schedule a meeting, and it would be handled in the same way that the chats were handled. So if you use the plugin, you add Teams functionality to it, it will then schedule your meeting and put it on people's calendars, and then you can actually join the meeting from within Teams itself. If there's conversation that is a part of that meeting, so let's say you record it or you have chat in the chat window, then you would actually be able to see that in the chats panel as well. So you could always refer back to some of that conversation. The other thing that I think is really important is external users. So for now, at least, the only way for you to be able to invite external users, unless they're a member of your team, is for you to use the Outlook functionality. So if you're trying to include users who are external and you want to add them to a Teams meeting, you create it through Outlook, using the plugin, you add the Teams functionality there, and then send externally. You'll also see that in the calendar feature, the calendar portion of the Teams application. And we didn't dig into that today, and we definitely will go into that in further detail, but your entire calendar is exposed in the Teams application. So you're able to keep track of and view the calendar from there very easily.
Hey, JoAnna, I'm back. And thank you, JoAnna. That was a great webinar. So, JoAnna, we have another question. Question is that they still have Skype for Business running. Should we disable S4B? That sounds like more of a technical question.
No, it's really, how do I, if I introduce Teams and I also still have Skype, how do I manage those two? And I'll say a lot of that really is going to come down to adoption. If you have users who are stuck in Skype, then they're going to continue to communicate in Skype. As if you move into Teams, then they'll start to use Teams for that communication. And I joke about it sometimes, in that sometimes it takes tough love, and sometimes it takes pulling people in who want to continue to work in that old technology. And so the more you use Teams, the more people will sort of be pulled away from the use of Skype. And I say it that way on purpose, because Skype for Business is in a transition. It's going to be gone. All of the Teams functionality or all of the meetings and chats functionality that was in Skype is now in Teams, plus a whole lot more. So there's really a benefit for you going to all Teams. Then you don't have to worry about the transition, really. The technical side of it you'll have to deal with, but the user side of it you won't, if everybody then is using Teams. Hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, so actually here's a really good question, which we're getting a lot. Can you use Microsoft Teams without being on the Microsoft 365 platform if someone's using Gmail? I guess that would get down to whether or not you use the freemium version.
So that actually is, yeah, so about a year and a half ago, Microsoft introduced the free Teams application availability. And so I could, as a Microsoft 365 account holder, create a meeting and send it to somebody's Gmail account, or other, businesses, or other, any of the other mail services, and invite them to come in. And as long as they have the application, or as long as they follow the link that you send, they'll be able to join. Teams is free to those users. Obviously, it would be a lot easier if you had an Office 365 account, but that's a whole nother story. Be able to connect and actually have access into Teams. I'm talking, my answer though was specific to having meetings. People can actually use Teams with you as a guest if you give them guest access into your tenant to work and collaborate with you inside of Teams. We can cover that in governance, but what I would say is, to open that up for external guest access, there is a lot that you should probably do before you allow that to happen. You want to make sure that you have some security and governance and risk and compliance things in place first before opening that guest access up. Hopefully we'll cover a lot of those topics though in a couple of the other ones. We have a specific one on governance coming up, but the Teams functionality will specifically talk about guest access.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit more about how to add people from outside your company?
To a meeting. So, okay, if you go to Outlook and you create a meeting and you use the plugin in the ribbon and you add Teams information to your email, you can then just send it like you would schedule a regular meeting, so that you, to the people that you need to be able to send it to. That is the easiest way to do external people if they are not guests in your tenant and they are not part of your Teams.
Okay, sounds good. Well, I think we should go ahead and wrap it up, JoAnna.
Great.
Okay, so thank you, JoAnna. That was great. And thank you, everyone, for joining.